Hi all and welcome. Thanks for being with us today. We're going to wait just a few minutes as people join us. Hi all, welcome to everyone joining. Thank you for being with us. We'll begin in just a moment. Hi all and welcome. We're just waiting for a few people to join us and we'll get started. Hi all and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Brianna Mobby and I'm the Program Officer for Women, Peace and Security here at the Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice, which is located in the University of San Diego's Kroc School of Peace Studies. You all set? I'm proud to welcome you to the launch of a report on intergenerational peacebuilding among women, created by our 2021 through 2022 cohort of Women Peacemaker Fellows. The core of our work at the Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice is to co-create learning with peacemakers, learning that is deeply grounded in the lived experience of peacemakers around the world, that is made rigorous by our place within a university ecosystem, and is immediately and practically applied by peacemakers to end cycles of violence. Together with Women Peacebuilders and international women, peace, and security organizations, the Kroc IPJ identifies the most critical peacebuilding challenges facing women leaders around the world. We then co-develop applied and actionable research to identify evidence-based solutions. The Kroc IPJ has hosted the Women Peacemakers Fellowship since 2002. The fellowship offers a unique opportunity for women peacebuilders to engage in a cycle of learning, practice, research, and participation that strengthens peacebuilding partnerships. A key part of this fellowship is co-creating research intended to shape the peacebuilding field, and we are proud to share the launch of our report, Intergenerational Peacebuilding Among Women, Leveraging the Power of Collaboration. This event features the work of 6 fellows from the Women Peacemakers Fellowship. Each fellow contributed to the overall report and authored a case study. These case studies are included in the full report, and you saw some of them on the slides we were sharing just a moment ago. They're also available as standalone documents, and we'll be sharing those documents in the chat today. Today, we have several of our fellows with us. You'll get to hear from the wonderful Ramatulai Aisatu Jallo, Nermin Munir, and Yusra Biar. During the fellowship, each of our fellows is connected to a partner that is a leader in the women, peace and security or peacebuilding spaces. And these partners provide guidance for the research process. We are so grateful for the input and support of these partners, and we're honored to have Madeline Reese and Liesl Kumalo join us in the event today. I also want to thank all of our other partners, including Hilda Deman, Hindna Fea, Bechak Padilla, Helena Gronberg, Zareen Hamid, and Palwasha Kakar for serving as partners as well. We have many great speakers today, so we'll be sharing short bios verbally, but we'll be sharing fuller bios in the chat so you can get a sense of how great each speaker is. Thank you again so much for joining us today. I'd like to invite Madeline Reese to give us an opening statement. Madeline Reese is a lawyer recognized for her work on human rights, particularly women's rights, and international peace and security. She is and has been the Secretary General of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom since 2010. Thank you so much, Madeline, for being with us today.
No, thanks, Brianna, for that lovely welcome. And it's wonderful to be here. It seems like such a long time since this started, and here you are now presenting this very brilliant report. I mean, I've got to congratulate you, the Institute, but also the team for putting together a report, which I think is unique in actually pulling together the challenges, but also the successes that there are of intergenerational cooperation. And just looking across the panel here, I was laughing before to say that, you know, I am the older ones of the intergenerational here, which is quite a fun place to be. It's not really happened to me before, 20 years ago, that was anyway. So as a lawyer, I'm going to start by talking about eggs, because I think it's an absolutely fascinating parallel to what we're actually seeing in real life happen with our intergenerational responses. I don't know whether you know, but I didn't until some time ago, that actually at the age of 4 months in utero, every girl has, or every girl child, potential girl child, has all the eggs you're ever going to have for the rest of your life. And your parent carries you around for the 5 months until you pop out. And then when you have yours, you will have your baby girl or whatever will have all the eggs she's ever going to have. And when you think of it, it just goes on and on and on. And that experience of being in that continuity, that continuum of passage of knowledge physically through the female line is absolutely quite incredible, because it really shows that there is an intergenerational evolutionary move from this big, almost minuscule, to then what we are and who we are and how we create. And as Shakespeare once said, you know, it goes on and on to the last syllable of recorded time. And if you want to be really biological, throw in mitochondria, which only passes through the female line. And that is the essence of what it is that our cells understand, what makes us move. That's us. We are that evolutionary necessity. We as a gender which has attempted forever, I think, to focus on reproduction, social reproduction, and not on fighting wars and creating systems of violence, are the ones that do carry that belief for change. So we are the evolutionary necessity that we need to actually believe in as we transmit our wisdom and knowledge intergenerationally. And I think that's something so beautiful about the report, because it focuses not just on gender and age, but also on this sort of three-dimensional way of looking at how we should be working together. Nothing is flat. Everything has to be looked at from a different perspective so we can really understand and deepen that understanding. And just to pause for a moment, when I was reading the report, I went through the recommendations that you made about how organizations should work. And I ran it past my gang here, who are majority much younger than me. And we ticked nearly all the boxes. So well done, kudos, Wilf, for having ticked all the boxes. But I know that that still isn't right, because we have difficulties in all organizations relating to how hierarchies work, how perceptions of power work, how age is seen as something that has to be respected and therefore deferred to, instead of us actually thinking, well, no, this is a continuum here. And we really have to make sure that from beginning to end. One colleague said to me, it's not so much, I don't feel I've got a safe space in Wilf to do this. I know I can. It's more that I was never brought up to do that. I was never brought up to claim the space, as a young child going onwards, to claim that space, to be able to have the authority, the confidence to put my views forward. There's work to be done on all of that. How do we create it? As the report also says, nudges have to be given from donors, from those who would give the support, in order to make sure that we can do the real inclusivity, the real intergenerational work. Why does it matter? Well, I think one thing that's hugely important to me, now I go back to being the boring lawyer, is that human rights law in particular works on the principle of the teleological approach. So essentially, nothing is frozen in time. It can't be. We need to look at scientific developments, developments in perceptions, what people, social awareness, those sorts of issues as to what should be laws to regulate how we approach human rights, how we approach systems, et cetera, et cetera. If we don't do this cross-generational, we're never going to get there. If you think of just in practical terms, if you look at how law worked in relation to LGBTQ, dreadful, appalling. If you think of the absence of any law regulating climate change, absolutely appalling. Without intergenerational work to actually identify, surface, reappraise, rethink, and then change, we would never have got to where we are now. Okay, pushback, absolutely, but it's not the young people that are pushing back. And that's what we have to really work on. So I think from a human rights perspective, from certainly how human rights feeds into peace and what we need to do to build peace, that three-dimensional differences of intersectionalities that we need to address, all of that has to come from all of us sharing what we know, why we know it, how we know it. So in closing, I just want to say that I think that this report, it shows not just the need for this intersectional approach, it shows more than that. It shows that we have a compelling necessity to look at things from a gender perspective, to look at things from how we interconnect across that spectrum, the spectrum of gender, how we surface that and work with it, how we share that information in a way which is respectful, meaningful, and goes to our deeper understanding of who we are, back to our eggs. Because if that is our metaphor, and that is our connection, then that is what we have to do. And I have to say, for the future generations that aren't here yet, we have an absolute obligation to them to keep on doing the sorts of work that we are doing in addressing the root causes of conflict and making sure that we find ways to ameliorate them. Thank you very much, and thank you for the report.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being a partner throughout this process. Next, I'd like to introduce Ramatulai Isatu Jallo, who will continue to reflect on some of what Madeline talked about interconnectedness. Ramu is going to provide us an overview on the key findings of this report and how we created it together. She is an attorney, human rights practitioner, and peace builder. Welcome.
Good morning and good evening, everyone on the call, and thank you so much for this platform. It's a really big honor to be able to celebrate the product of our cohort, and I'm really proud to have created this piece of work together with everyone on this call. And without further ado, I will stick to my task, which is to introduce a little bit about the fellowship, how the report was created, and the overall findings. As Brianna had already touched on at the beginning, this is a fellowship that has been existent for the past 22 years, and I can testify that it has been a safe, reflective space for women like me in peace building all over the world to think more deeply about our work and to have a sense of innovation, a space where we can play with ideas and really think critically and learn new skills. And so in the cycle of learning, practice, and research, this is what we did in this cohort. I think our cohort was special because it was launched in 2021 for the 20th anniversary of basically this program. And so we had a large cohort. We had 3 emerging peace builders, being Yusra, Hila, and myself, and senior women peace builders, Zarka, Mary U, and Neri. And we were able to collaborate and build this report together with the team. In terms of the methodology, in relation to how this report came to be, it was really centered on central research questions, looking at the strategies of women peace builders, what has been used to build intergenerational partnerships, what are the challenges in building such partnerships, and how exactly these partnerships have contributed to peace building, as well as the obstacles in terms of intergenerational partnerships in building effective peace. And so these were the central questions that cut across all of our different case studies. And the research was basically in 3 stages. So it started off with a desk review of all existing literature in relation to intergenerational peace building, what it means, what contributions have been made from it. From there, we then entered the data gathering and basically data gathering stage, where we all conducted semi-structured interviews, focus group discussions in 2 parts, on the ground for each one of our different case studies, and also internationally in relation to the broader framework of the report. And so from there, the final stage was basically the interpretation of the findings and data analysis, followed by validation of the report to the finished product that you have before you today. And in terms of the titles of the respective case studies, we had 2 pieces from Afghanistan. The first was Intergenerational Gaps in Grassroots Peace Building in the Eastern Provinces of Afghanistan by Hela. The next one was 2 Generations, One Dream, Equity or Equality for Women in Afghanistan by Zarqa. By Neri, we had Egyptian Women Peace Building in Search of Connection, Recognition, and Space. By Yusra, we had the role of the merchant dates in peace building and preventing violent extremism in Morocco. And finally, we had intergenerational coalition building between women-led civil society organizations in Botswana by myself. These represent the case studies that we have in the report this year. And as a summary of the key findings, all of these findings cut through all of the case studies, in the sense that one finding was that working across generation really does improve effectiveness and reach. Intergenerational peace partnerships require clear communication and respect and recognition of expertise. And it was also a finding that networks and coalitions actually foster intergenerational partnerships as a method. Another finding was that meaningful participation, recognition of legitimacy, and sufficient funding for intergenerational work are essential, and that ultimately partners, both emerging and senior, should focus mostly on learning from each other. And that is basically a summary of how the report came to be and our key findings. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to work with all of these fellows and learn together. And I want to introduce another person who's been critical to the research process, which is Dr. Elena Stavrovska. She's going to facilitate a panel now with fellows and partners. She is a feminist peace scholar who works as a lecturer in international relations at the University of Bristol, and she's been really critical to this process and supporting this cohort. So welcome to Elena and welcome to our panelists.
Thank you so much, Brianna. It's wonderful to be here today, reunited after a while with this wonderful group of people. I have a rather easy task actually today, to chair this panel, in which we will present parts of the report. So the report, as Ramo noted, but also as you might have seen, or as you will see after this launch, combines some so-called global insights, for which we've interviewed some of the people who are in the audience with us. Welcome, as well as case study specific insights. On the panel, I'm joined by 3 of the Women Peacemaker Fellows, 2021-2022, together with one of the international partners that supported their work. So I will invite the panel members one by one to present some of the findings, as well as more broadly discuss the importance of intergenerational collaboration. So on that note, without further ado, I'll start with our international partner, Lizel Khumalo, who's joined the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation in 2022 as the gender specialist. Lizel's work work is largely focused most on peace building and women, peace, and security. So as I mentioned, she was one of the international partners supporting our fellows. And I would like to invite Lizelle to share insights on the importance of intergenerational coalition building, specifically among institutions or NGOs. Lizelle, about 8 minutes, if you can, please.
If I can, Ilana, I'll do my very best. And so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. It's really an honor to be part of this launch. When I think back of when we started the discussions and where do we go, with this conversation, it's really inspiring to see what the cohorts came up with. And it also speaks to this conversation in terms of international coalition building. But what I'm focusing on is more on the institutions there and NGOs, right? But I think the important aspect that this conversation highlights, and we often focus when we're talking about women, peace, and security agenda, that we often focus on conflicts and ending the conflicts and everything else, right? But what we don't focus on, or our attention is not often on what is the peace and what sustains the peace and where this peace lies, right? And so if you read this report, and I really do advise you to go and read it and spend time with it, and looking at the underlying message that comes across and why this intergenerational coalitions are so important, because you know what? It also tells us that peace has generational connotations, right? So the reality is that peace is not static. It is a dynamic process that changes. And, so what we regard as Madeline and myself as the older generation, what was peace and what we wanted to attain for peace is totally different to the realities and the challenges that young people face today, right? So the fact is we cannot say that we've come to a state of actually achieving peace, because we have to recognize that peace changes. We focus so much on, yes, conflict changes, we've got terrorism, but we never speak about how peace also changes, so that we can talk about how do we sustain it. And these coalitions, that when we have these conversations and we open up the space for it, for people to sit together and have it, because the point is, and Madeline raised it, that age does play a big role in how do you respect it and how do you come to the table to have those types of conversations, intergenerationally, is not easy. And it's also not something that happens organically. We would like to think so, because we think we're women and we just generally allow it, but we fought for certain spaces and we fought for those things. And so we also then end up being gatekeepers and everything else, right? But then what we have to recognize with the WPS agenda is that it actually opens up our minds to talking about the peace and the continuous peace process. So it shifted our thinking, and it highlighted, that despite the vulnerability and often the risk that women face, that just by being virtue of being women, that they have something to bring to the table. And I want to highlight something that's very important, that we often equate the struggle of WPS only within a conflict setting. And that's why I loved Ramu's suggestion of bringing in Botswana and bringing it in. Because, if you look at that global study on conflict and violence assessment that was done a few years ago, right, we found that domestic violence kills more people than wars. So it's estimated that about 9 people are killed in domestic disputes compared to 1 person that dies in a civil conflict. So that's why I'm saying, let's look at what we're talking about when we're talking about the peace, right? So we have to start focusing on what is the well-being and what is the focus within our communities that we're leaving behind, right? So, I do believe that national processes are important. We need a foundation from which to work. We need our policies and all of that. But the solutions do not lie there. The solutions really do come in within our local initiatives and our informal conversations that we have. And that talks about that building social cohesion and everything else. So when we think about this intergenerational conversation, and it says we are, for a number of years, we've been doing research in terms of trauma, transitional justice and everything. And interesting enough, just like, Madeline mentioned about DNA, that do you know that trauma is also being transferred in our DNA? So how we respond and how we deal with these issues are part of us. So how do we break these cycles, right? That is through the intergenerational conversations. And so I'm realizing I'm running out of time. So let me just mentioned that we have to recognize that within our communities, even within our countries, and that's why I also like that when we say East Afghanistan, that we realize it's a totally different conversation than what we would have with the rest of Afghanistan, right? Is that communities differ. And their realities also differ. So this is the important space, and this is where civil society organizations and NGO play an important role. Because remember that if we're talking about these differing views, and if we're talking about, because intergenerational conversations are very difficult conversations to have. If my mother was a victim of abuse, and how do I break that cycle, and all of those types of things requires a neutral party to come in. And that neutral party often would be civil society organizations that understand the context, right? And then what I found is very important, and in terms of the work that we're doing within communities as well, is that we ensure that there is awareness in terms of these issues, because oftentimes we don't want to raise them because they create certain challenges and things like that. So through the advocacy of intergenerational convening, and I do want to say that it helps that if those are formal structures, so that they're coming into an informal, but if they're formal, it kind of also helps to give that gravitas to the conversation that we're having and everything, right? But then also that we take that step back and realize that as peace builders and everything that we're coming to do, that communities have the solutions, and that community-based solutions are the best way to achieve sustaining peace. But what we leave, and especially given the limited funding, right, and that forming these coalitions within civil societies are very important, because what we leave behind is actually a community-owned process that does not only deal with community issues, but also has a psychosocial support mechanism that's being built into it that can help deal with these issues as they appear, so that as we recognize that peace is dynamic, that these things and these discussions need to be continuous. They're not once-off continuous processes and everything else, right? So I do want to highlight and say that the coalitions that are formed through intergenerational dialogues and everything else, they empower community members. And I think we sometimes focus so much on our role and what we must be doing and everything else. But what we're actually doing is we want to achieve, from a very grassroots level, we want to achieve peace, right? And we have to empower our community members. And the best way to do that, and that's why I always think that when we have that women coalitions that spread across generations, and we don't just look at it in terms of age, but we look at it in terms of the intersectionality, and how we involve people, that there's something that we leave behind that's very empowering and everything else, right? And so what I do then think is that building of trust and mutual understanding that is needed to sustain processes and everything else is so important for this agenda and everything else. And so what I want to say is that they highlight it, and the examples are very practical examples. And I do think that, as we've mentioned, that the solutions do speak to a very practical solutions, both for practitioners and for decision makers and everything else. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Excellent timing. Thank you so much, Lizelle. Thank you for highlighting the importance of community-based work in building sustainable peace, not just in areas where we think there is actual violent conflict, but also more broadly. And also thank you for really emphasizing one aspect of the beauty of the report, which is the granular approach that the fellows have really brought to each case study, considering intersectional differences and oppressions, but also intersectional experiences. I should mention to those who have joined us that if you have any questions, that we will have a Q&A following the panel. So if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat and we'll ask them at the end. Ramu will also be joining us in answering questions. So the questions can go not just towards the panelists, but towards Ramu as well as one of the other fellows. So next up, we have Nermin Munir, who is one of the Women Peacemaker Fellows, as I mentioned. She's a peace educator and storyteller, who is the co-founder and director of Misriyati LLC. Neri, your research focused on the impact of interpersonal, intergenerational relationships on peace building. Can you share a little bit about the strategies that women use to open access as well as create opportunities for different generations of peace builders?
Yes. Thank you, Elena. Hello, everyone. I will try to be concise. So I put some points in front of me so that I don't get confused, because also the research was a little bit difficult for me, because on one hand, I'm not a researcher, but also defining what is peace building in Egypt was really tricky. Egypt is not considered a conflict zone area. So during the research, trying identifying who are peacemakers and actually maybe helping them to understand that they are peacemakers was very difficult, but also interesting, and one of the findings as well. So I will focus on the question of strategies, but I want to give like a little bit of a context on what did I do. Personally, I was curious as a peacemaker coming from the capital, privileged woman, I would say, well-educated, but also unveiled Muslim woman, who works a lot in the underprivileged areas outside of the capital. I was so curious to understand, of course, on one hand, what type of relationships exists between the different generations of women who I or they identify themselves as peacemakers. As I said, it was difficult, but also I was so curious to see the impact of the identity of the women, those coming from the capital like myself, and those from these local communities. And I said identity, I mean like religious identity, value system, the look, the origin. How does this affect these relationships? And is it possible to build trust across these identities, including generations? With all this diversity and complexity, I was so curious about this because of what I'm doing, right? But then as the research continued, this question was a bit subsided because other questions was more existent between the women. So the first big finding that I really was inspired with is that there is so much going on in terms of strategies for women relationships, interactions, but also intergenerational in the private space. There's a lot of negotiation happening in the private space inside the homes, but also in the religious institution, the church and the mosques. In these like informal friendships between the women, it has a lot of impact on opening spaces for more and more women to access the public space. As an example, many of the women who have been going through a journey into peace building, either like as leaders or as just curious in understanding peace and non-violence, they have been engaged in active negotiation with the families to convince them to send their daughters or even their wives to attend trainings on peace building, or even attend trainings on just I don't know, like a business or for employment, and negotiating with them in the private space in these very private arenas. And these negotiations, many of them succeeded. On one hand, because these women have more access to the private space than men, but also because many of the, I would say men, but also other people who have power, when they see these women originating from the same local communities, but still somehow preserving the values of the community, but also acquiring these new values of freedom and inclusion and peace building. And they see the successful model of them being able to combine these set of values together and succeeding in life and becoming somehow a role model, right? The families get more trust. They break the fear somehow of letting their like daughters or wives or whatever access the public space. So this is one of the biggest strategies, I would say. And I read later on about this a lot, and I saw how neglected the private space activism is in the overall literature of civic engagement. And this is a big problem in communities like Egypt that is more conservative, that is more, there's a lot of issues on related to social norms, especially gender norms, that prevent women from accessing the public space. So we neglect the private space where there is so much action and learning happening. The second strategy that I observed, sorry, because yes, with a lot of women worked as translators. Peace building in Egypt, as I said, is not very, as a field, as a concept, it's not very common in Egypt. Again, because as I said, we, but also the international community do not see Egypt as a conflict affected area or a conflict zone. So anyway, so working with peace building is not the concepts, the knowledge is not really local. I would say most of it is coming from international resources, international actors, right? So these women, many of these women played a role in translating these concepts into more relevant concepts to the communities that they work in and in the relationships with these other women. So I would say that the dialogue that happened between the women in these communities created a new knowledge, a new relevant and context-related knowledge when it comes to peace building. And this facilitated a lot of the dialogue that I was talking about, because when they speak with the father or the husband or the mother, they have to use a language that is relevant to them, right? They cannot tell them, you have to be inclusive. You have to promote, adapt gender equality. They will not understand this, right? But they use the text from the religion, even, from the Islamic, from Islam or from Christianity. They try to research what language, what resources that they have that they can use that is so relevant to inclusion and peace building. So this is the second thing. Just to conclude, I want to maybe end by this part of my research. I came across this concept that I think was present in my research. It's called the art of presence by Asif Bayat. He's saying that the new definition of citizenship should be focusing on the art of presence practiced by citizens who have the courage and creativity, in spite of all odds, to circumvent constraints, utilizing what is available, discovering new spaces within which to make oneself heard, seen, felt, and realized. And I think that this is what's happening in Egypt between the women peacemakers.
That was perfectly on time, Neri. Thank you so very much. I would encourage everyone, we will be sharing the full report after the launch event. So I will encourage everyone to look through all the case studies and read more in details, because they are so rich, empirically rich, they're very thought through, and they all contain recommendations as well that are specific to the case studies. But we'll get to that in a second. Again, encouragement for everyone to add any questions or comments they might have in the chat box while we're moving along the introducing the case studies. So next we have joining us, next person we have joining us is Zarka Yaftali, who is also one of the Women Peacemakers Fellows, so therefore one of the people who contributed to this report. Zarka is the Executive Director of the Women and Children Legal Research Foundation. And you can hear me, Zarka? Excellent. So this work can be very challenging, as we all know, and as the report really highlights. So can you tell us a little bit about what you found in your research on different generations of Afghan women activists specifically, and their ability to work together and advance women's rights in Afghanistan?
Thank you so much, Elena. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. First of all, I want to say thank you from Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice that provide me the opportunity to be the fellow of in the Women Peacemaker programs. Thank you all, and thanks from all of the team, Brianna, and all the team, and that they work very closely with us, Elena, you, and all the team that you work with has very closely during the case study that we had and during the life of our fellowship. Inside of this, I want to say thanks from ICANN and also Welfare Organization for their support and being with me during the fellowship and also the case study that I worked on. About the case study, I'm sure that as you mentioned, you are going to share all of the full case study with all of the participants. So there is no need to talk more about the details. I want to just focus about some specific issue regarding the intergenerational peace process between the senior generation and women activists in Afghanistan, and also the new generation of peace activists in Afghanistan. As right now, there is lots of gaps between these two generations in the country. Why I did my case study about this issue. As we all know, after a fall of Afghanistan in 2021, a large number of senior peace activists and women activists, they left the country. And right now they are in the different countries. They are in US, UK, EU, and also Canada. But there was on that time, after August 2021, honestly, at the beginning of the time, there wasn't any peace, any activist, any woman peace maker in the country to raise the voice of those women that they were there, and unfortunately, Taliban deprived all of them from all of their basic rights, and there was lots of violation on them. As we all know, Afghanistan is the only country in the world that women don't have access to education, access to employment. They don't have political participation. They don't have social participation, and there is lots of kind of violence against women right now in Afghanistan. And gender apartheid is another issue that right now we want to work on gender apartheid as well. So on that time, in Afghanistan, the new generation, the new peace activists, they were the only women in the country, the young women in the country, that they stand against the Taliban extremist regime. And they raise their voice. They start fighting for their rights against the Taliban. And their demand was for all women in Afghanistan. So these, in my perspective, those women that right now in Afghanistan, they are the real hero. Those women that they are in Afghanistan and they are fighting for themselves. I'm not just talking about those women that they are in Afghanistan, but they are supporting Taliban. From my perspective, those women that they are fighting for themselves, they are fighting for other women in Afghanistan, and they started civic activism in the country. Those women are the real champion for all of us. But there was some problem, as maybe all of you know, that there was lots of gaps between the senior activists and also the new generation of peacemaker in Afghanistan. Because one of the things that all the time the new generation emphasized and pointed was that they all the time they pointed to the senior activist and woman peacemaker, that why you left the country, and why as you left the country, you are not our representative right now, and we don't accept you as our representative. So this was a gap that from the beginning of fall of Afghanistan, we were the witness. So because of this, I wanted to do a case study, a research about this, to find the gaps, to identify the challenge, and how we can have some recommendation to solve this problem, how we can bring coordination between the two generations in Afghanistan, how they can work together and closely regarding the women's right in the country. Because right now, there is more need for women coordination, for women solidarity and unity in Afghanistan. Not just Afghanistan women. There is need to work with to have solidarity with all women around the world, to have their support and coordination with women of Afghanistan. So when I did this case study, and there was very interesting findings that I found during the study. One of the important things for me was that both generations, they have same demand, they have same dream, they have same expectation, but the way is different. because the senior generation, they choose some different way, and the new generation, they want to go in a new way, but their goal, their aim, and their vision is the same. And from where this gap came between the two generations in Afghanistan, one of the issues that I found during the interview that I had, and also during the focus group discussion, was that in the past 20 years, those women that they were active, and they were honestly, during the past 20 years, those women that they were in Afghanistan, they did a lot. They did lots of sacrifice, and with lots of struggle and efforts, we achieved the gain that we had during the past 20 years regarding to women participation in different areas, women political participation, women participation in the peace process, and in all area. But on that time, the senior generation, the woman activists, they didn't want to provide any opportunity for the new generation. So this was the main problem. This was the main problem for the senior generation and also the new generation about their work. Right now, the new generation, they are thinking that those women are those that they left us in a very dire situation, and also those women, they are those women that they shrink the space for us during the past 20 years, and they didn't provide us any opportunity. They took all of the platforms, all of the opportunity for them, but they didn't do anything for us. Even they didn't provide any capacity building for us. They didn't want to provide some opportunity for us, that how they can transfer their knowledge and also their experience for us, and put us as an alternative, as an option, that when they are not in the country, we can continue their work. We can raise the voice of Afghanistan women. So this was the main problem that I found. And instead of this, there was some other problems as well. But at all, the important issue in this case study is that all women in Afghanistan, new generation and senior generation, they have the same drive. They want to fight against Taliban. They want to provide the opportunity, and also they want to establish justice in Afghanistan, and they want to bring freedom for all people in Afghanistan, especially for women of Afghanistan. But the way of their fighting and civic activism is different. So instead of this problem, I had some specific recommendation as well in this case study, and this recommendation is about that how we can establish more coordination between the senior woman peacemaker and activists, and also the new generation of peace builder, woman peace builder in Afghanistan. Those women that they are the new generation of Afghanistan, they need to build their capacity.
Sarka,
There is lots of need to build their capacity, also to provide the opportunity for funding for them. So yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt. We'll have a chance to talk about the recommendations. I'm just mindful of time so that we get to Yusra as well. Keep the thought on the recommendations, please, and I'll come back to you in the Q&A to ask you specifically about this. Is that okay?
Yes, okay.
We've just gone a little over time.
Yeah,
okay.
I just finished.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you. Excellent. We also have Hila, who, as Ramo mentioned, worked on another case study on Afghanistan, specifically on the eastern provinces, who is unfortunately not with us here today, but that's another case study that you should certainly look at. And last but not least, another amazing woman peacemaker fellow joining us today, Yusra Biar, hopefully I pronounced that right, who is a program manager at High Atlas Foundation, focused on youth and cultural programs. So Yusra focused specifically on Morocco and developed a case study that is slightly different than all the others. So Yusra, you focused specifically on a national level program that was created by the Kingdom of Morocco. What makes this program, and tell us a little bit about the program as well, of course, successful in terms of intergenerational collaboration? 8 minutes, and I'll start waving with my hands at 1 minute before.
All right. Thank you so much, Helena. Thank you, everyone, for having me today. And I'll try to be very brief. and, straight to the point, but I would like to give a background of why I chose the program specifically. And I want to join what Nidhi said earlier about, it's very critical when you go to North Africa and you want to talk about, peace building. What is peace building exactly, so that we can talk about it? And for Morocco specifically, you have, first of all, talking about women. What is a woman's role in Morocco? There's these gender roles that are and stereotypes about women. And so you go into the country and you say, we're going to talk about the women peace builders. And not even the women know that they are peace builders. But I want to mention a specific code that, stuck into my brain while doing the research program. And I spoke to a Murshida. I think I'll start by defining what is a Murshida, because I'm not sure everyone knows what that is. So basically in Morocco, in the religious spheres, you have men that can give you advices about how to act religiously. And since Morocco is considered as an Islamic country, then, it acts a lot by the Islamic rules. And so for years and years, we've had men telling on head of advisory boards, telling us what to do and, giving us advices. But then at a certain point, we were like, yes, okay, the women are not represented in the country, specifically in the religious sphere. What can we do to include them? So the country created the Murshida, which is basically a woman that can give advices on religious aspects and social aspects of life to women and to boys that are, between 16 to 25 years old. And so you have the Murshida that you can go for specific advices or for specific social and development training. And so one of the Murshidas, as I was saying, I told her, so what is your impact on these women? And if I tell you that you're a peace builder, how do you see that? And she goes, I'm not a peace builder. I'm training peace builders. I'm supporting peace builders. Every woman in every household is a peace builder. She's there, she's raising children. Those children have specific ideologies, and they are the ones that act in a society. So basically, I'm training peace builders all over Morocco. And that was like, okay, you're right. At the end of the day, every woman is a core of every family, and it's important to train them. And so to go back to your question, Elena, about what is the impact, right, of the intergenerational work done in Morocco today, and I think right after the Murshida program, we had a lot of women coming together, young women from new generation and old women from different generations coming together to work on specific areas of development, social development, economical development, because they understood the importance of transferring skills between the two generations. And, we've had older Murshidas going in and leading a couple of trainings with younger Murshidas. But at a certain point of the program, they were like, okay, we're training these young women, but we lack certain skills in certain aspects, such as communication, marketing, such as, communicating with different partners. And so what is the solution to that? And I think they come up with the idea of including younger Murshidas, which is younger women, to lead those trainings. So it was as they go into the program that they realized the importance of intergenerational work. They didn't label it that way. They didn't name it as intergenerational work. For them, it was just a solution to be able to transfer the knowledge and to transfer the training or whatever, communication they were leading with the younger generation of the school. And I think that's one thing that stuck out. The second thing was, as we went, the younger generation had these capacities of mobilizing different people. A lot of them were activists. A lot of them, they had the passion, they had the will, and they had the energy to lead new programs. And so that brought a lot of, energy into the room with the older generations. And I think they created this very safe platform. They built trust between the two generations, which was important. And so yeah, that's basically the instant impact that we've noticed during the motion. That's, I'm so sorry I have noise around me, unexpected. I hope heard.
Thank you, Yusra. We could hear you very clearly,
Okay.
both your voice and the message. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Now we have presented some of the case studies. As I said, all the others are available in the report, and the report goes much more broadly than just the case studies. And I would like now to welcome Ramu to join us back on the panel, so that we can address some of the questions that have been raised. Again, an invitation to everyone to pop any questions or comments or encouragement for our panelists that you might have in the chat. So the first question, I'll direct this to Ramu and Zarka, as promised, Zarka. Does the report have recommendations for organizations dealing with internal divisions across age? So I think this speaks to, Ramu, perhaps to some of the recommendations that you have developed around your case studies, but also Zarka, I think some of your recommendations would be valuable to share here too. Let's keep the answers brief so that we can go through more questions. Ramu, do you want to go first and then we'll go to Zarka?
Sure, thank you very much for the question. I think the question does tie a lot in with what I was speaking about in my case study. So in my case study, I was looking at coalition building between intergenerational partnerships between senior women and emergent peace builders, but in the civil society space, so organizationally. I don't, just in relation to managing the age divide, as much as one might sit and say, oh, let's think about deliberately putting in a quota, for example, to include emergent women in organizations, I think that might be part of it, but honestly, then it brings the question of when you add youth and STIR, does that change anything? So really, when we look at creating meaningful partnerships within organizations, I think it's really down to both players. On the part of senior women peace builders and organizations, having that deliberate action plan of mentoring emergent women that are coming into the organization and making them co-partners. It's not something that should just roll off the tongue, but creating deliberate measures within the organization to do that, whether it means having planning forums and you invite your youth emergent peace builders in the room, whether you mandate and give a particular portfolio for leadership with the emergent youth. And similarly, in relation to emergent youth peace builders, how do we make space for learning about past experiences in terms of senior women peace builders? So I think it's something that's touched more in detail in my recommendations, but definitely, like, it might look different from organization to organization, but primarily making sure that there's a deliberate effort to make sure that there's succession plans and co-mentorship, I think.
Wonderful, very much on point. Thank you, Ramu. Zarka, would you like to come in with some of the recommendations, both from your case study, but also more broadly about organizations or even or activists that deal with this internal intergenerational differences and tensions?
Sure, Elena. For recommendation, there are some specific recommendation, and I want to add some other recommendation as well. First of all, it is very important and necessary to support and provide capacity building programs for those women peace builders that they are inside of Afghanistan and they are fighting for their rights and all women in the country, and also provide the funding and financial resource for those women that they are outside of Afghanistan, women leaders and activists, and we should provide this kind of funding for them. And it is very important to provide platform for Afghanistan women, both those the new generation that they are in Afghanistan and the leadership, the senior generation that they are outside of the country. If the international community provide the platform for women of Afghanistan, then women of Afghanistan, they have their own voice. We have our own voice. We don't need for any other people that they should be our voice. We have our voice, but we need a platform to raise our voice there with the policymakers and also influential people. And instead of that, it's very important that in all of the discussion which is conducting about Afghanistan, women from both generation, senior women and also new generation should be in the table, and they should talk about themselves. If the women of Afghanistan be in the all of negotiation about Afghanistan, about the peace process of Afghanistan, then definitely the issue, the agenda of women will be in the table, and it will be not on the table. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Zarka. I mean, thank you, everyone. You've been so on point. And we have a comment in the chat that says, this research piece is so important. Thank you so much to all the research cohort, the sponsors and the initiators of this wonderful research. So a round of applause for you all. We have more questions. Tied to this, I want to ask, and then I'll return to Cassandra's question in the chat. How can institutions and organizations facilitate building intergenerational partnerships? Yusra, perhaps you could come in on this, and then we'll go to Lizelle for some reflections.
Yes, thank you, Elena. So I think one thing that I think Lizelle mentioned earlier, which is a community-based solution, and I think international partners need to have this as a priority, you know, when focusing on work in a specific region, is that they need to take into consideration the cultural context. They need to take into consideration the context of any country, either religious, cultural, or economical context. And so that's one thing to put into consideration. Again, working with different organizations and not always focusing on senior organizations, because we do tend to find this when international partners come into a specific, you know, country for peace building work, they tend to go more for senior consultants. They go for, you know, the older generation that has already established a lot of work and a lot of trust during the past years, but they, I wouldn't say marginalized, but they don't focus really on young researchers. Those young researchers, they have the current context, they have the current skills. They can merge that with, you know, the partnership of the senior consultants or researchers or organizations, and together they can build, you know, this workforce and this platform that can lead into instant impact and, you know, efficiency in peace building.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yusra. Lisa?
Thank you. Yeah, Yusra covered it very well, but what I want to say is we must recognize that trust building takes time. And often, you know, donors come in and external partners come in, and they just assume that there is trust within communities. Why do we do peace building? Because there was a breakdown of peace, so it needs to be rebuilt, right? There was a relapse of conflict. There was all of, so you have to understand that its social fabric has been broken. So instead of looking and developing programs that have outputs and things like that, the output should be a trust building exercise. And I've seen it. I always say, I live in the smallest province within South Africa, and we have the most diverse issues per community that you can think of. And that speaks to the fact that even in the small province, if you break it further down within the communities, there are so many issues that need to go. And you come in and you assume, because I have a national idea of what's going on, it does not necessarily fit the community idea. So spending time, giving that time for their trust building, and to give then the peace builders who are either going in or are trained, that time to build trust is so important. Because I do think that sometimes it takes, when I look at the work that we do, just to get the community to speak to the police, took a whole year. And that was us continuously engaging and things like that. So we often take time for granted when it comes to peace building, because we also think peace building has a start and an end date, and that's not true, right? So even then, when we saw, you know, Zarka brought it up, intergenerational coalitions take time to build as well, especially when the trust, and especially when young women feel that the older generation let them down, that they compromised, you know, for the sake of peace. they actually let certain issues go and now they must take it up and then it's not the time. So, you also have to give that space, in things like that. And so it is that thing of saying, understand your community and understand that you need time to build coalitions as well, because they don't happen automatically.
Yes, thank you so much, Lizelle, for that. And wonderful addition to Yusra's response, emphasizing both, I think, the slowness, the deliberate approach that is needed, but also the withdrawal, I guess, of some of the assumptions around linearity of these things is critical here. So I'm going to go with the next question, which is a question to Neri. Cassie says, hi, Cassie, who is someone who we know through the program as well. The importance of building trust and mutual understanding has been frequently mentioned as it is foundational to building peace. However, building trust, as Lizelle just said, is a timely process. So Neri, what specific strategies and tactics did you use to build trust between yourself and those who live in different areas and may have different value systems than yours?
Yeah. I'm not sure I have an answer because I'm still grappling with this question myself. But I can share from my experience some of the things that I think bridge the gap between me and them. And I think it would be basic questions, basic answers. First of them, I believe that my curiosity. I feel that whenever I'm more curious about these people, and with curiosity, of course, I mean questioning a lot of my own agenda, my own judgment, my own stereotypes, and honestly putting myself out there as a learner myself. And I think this curiosity breaks a lot of the fear and a lot of the threat that these women or these communities feel from someone like me. And curiosity can even show in the way that I look at them, in the way that I ask questions. Second one, honesty. And this is particularly important and relevant to the third thing is building informal relationships. And this is, I think, an effort not all women, professional women peacemakers from the capital maybe are interested to do, but I do it. So whenever I finish a workshop or a program, I really like to keep these informal friendships with the people that I worked with. It's complicated. Sometimes it gets really unprofessional. Sometimes it puts me in very complex situations. But I see a lot of potential in these informal, not planned conversations, journey. Because as you said, it's a time-consuming process, right? So if we live peace together, I feel that this human connection breaks a lot of barriers and builds a lot of trust in a way that we would never imagine or plan in our programs.
Yeah, thank you, Neri, and thank you for the honesty in sharing your own experiences in an approach to this question. So there's a question to Ramu now. Ramu, you're currently an emerging peace builder. When you become the senior peace builder, what do you think will be the main skills and strategies that the next generation of emerging peace builders will be sharing with you? This is a bit forward thinking here as well.
That's a really interesting question. I think there was an interview during the course of the case study that I conducted in Botswana. There was a participant that talked about the fact that youth, emergent peace builders are built for the particular environment that they're in a way that maybe senior women would have been in their particular time and when they were emergent. So I don't know, I think the way that emergent peace builders probably coming up harness art, harness technology, and so in sort of bringing peace building forward, particularly in Botswana, is something that I would probably be learning from. particularly through like harnessing podcasting, radio, TikTok, Instagram, so many different types of and ways and methods of peace building. So I think definitely in the arts and definitely technologically, that's something that I would probably be rehashing as I go into maybe the senior portion of peace building, but also just recognizing some of the comments that have been made in relation to Botswana and about the issue of gender-based violence being really urgent. And also just in relation to how civil society can be improved. Really, I think intergenerational peace building partnerships really do have a platform or provide an opportunity to really strengthen our civil society organizations in Botswana, I think, particularly harnessing how the youth tap into new strategies for fighting against gender-based violence. So I think this report would be useful and would be implemented.
That was an excellent jumping into the next question I had as well, Ramu. So thank you for covering both. Excellent. So I have now a question for maybe Neri and Zarka. What are the key strategies in your experience and in what you found in your research on the individual level for both senior and junior peace builders to be able to work together effectively? Like what have you found to be helpful? Again, be that through your experience or through the interviews and the focus groups that you did. Zarka, would you like to go first? And then we go to Neri.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Elena. From my perspective, and according to the study findings, the individual strategy right now in Afghanistan is that the things that we are doing right now in practical. First, we a group of women, we have planned to meet and organize some meetings with the new generation of women that they are right now they are in Afghanistan, and some of them are in Pakistan. Those women that they are protesting every day for their rights, and we have planned to have some meeting with this, and also to see their viewpoints and to see how we can coordinate and how we can support them. Right now they have lots of problem in the country, and we are going to have the first meeting after the 8 days. It means next week we have the first meeting with them, and it is a very good solution that we can work with them. Inside of this right now, for example, I'm working in Afghanistan. My organization is still working in Afghanistan, and we establish different women young groups in the Kabul and also in other provinces of Afghanistan. And through this young women groups, that a large number of them are activists right now. They are activists in the country, and we have some plan to work with them to build their capacity, to provide the opportunity of participating in the different training session in the country, outside of the country, online and in person. So this is two approach that right now I'm working with this, and inside of this, it is very important that we as a senior generation and women peace activists, we provide the opportunity, the platform in the international level for the new generation of Afghanistan. Because one of the things that the new generation they are saying and they are thinking is that they are thinking that the senior peace builders, we sideline them, and because of this we are not going to provide any opportunity for them. For example, there is an event after some weeks, and we identify 2 women from inside of Afghanistan, and they will participate on that conference, and they will be talk on behalf of Afghanistan women on that conference. So this is some kind of approach that we can make coordination between the 2 generations in Afghanistan, and then we can work together.
Excellent. Thank you, Zarka. Neri, do you want to come in on the same question, please?
As I said during my research, this was actually one of the biggest questions. But then as the research went on, this wasn't like a big question among the participants, the interviewees. So I don't think that we worked on it that much. But I feel it's a very important question because, for example, during my research, I had I worked with junior peacemakers, and we had conflicts, which was really interesting. Had conflicts, and it was very, very interesting to see how relevant this was for the research. But anyway, but in general, I would say the same thing that I said before. I think curiosity, again, honesty, a lot of internal work, especially, of course, me as a senior peacemaker, a lot of working on the ego. Yeah, like understanding how can I fulfill the need to be acknowledged in terms of experience and knowledge by the junior peacemaker that I work with, because this is important need, right? A need for acknowledgement or status, not a bad thing. It's actually a need. But then on the other hand, how can also I as a peacemaker respect and value and be curious about what these junior peace builders bring in, not just in terms of knowledge, but also in terms of spirit and also wisdom that comes from their own background and experience. So I guess open communication and dialogue, internal work, continuous internal work is very important.
Thank you, Neri. And I should also say that Ramu's case study specifically also has a breakdown of, among other things, of recommendations for junior and for senior peace builders and people, women specifically working in the civil society organizations. So in addition to what Zarka and Neri just shared, do have a look at Ramu's case study as well. So one last question for Lizelle, and then I'll have one final question for the fellows. Lizelle, in your experience, how do international and regional frameworks, policies, or even organizations, if that is something that you can draw on, support taking an intergenerational approach more broadly?
If I have to just use a good example that I think everybody should have a look at, and I always say that the West African network of peace builders is a very good example in terms of how they, recognizing that the region they're in is very unstable within Africa. And so they have to continuously reimagine and think about what conflict prevention really means and everything else, right? And so they've got an element within that peace building that focuses on women. And then they have the women peace builders that are part of that. And what we see now, and especially going forward, and some of the interventions that we're seeing are trickling into the rest of Africa, comes from West Africa, is that generational thing where they were the ones and the forerunners in terms of creating those platforms of saying, we've got the youth peace and security agenda, we've got the WPS agenda. These two speak to basically the same thing. Let's be more inclusive, because, and for me, that I do think is a very, very good example. I also think in terms of a regional one would be the African Women Leadership Network. And the purpose of this leadership network is especially to do that mentorship, to say that we recognize that we as older or senior generation have certain skills, but we need to transfer it, because what we recognize, and I think, the Afghanistan case study shows that if something happens, that those that are most recognizable are the ones who flee first and have the means of fleeing, right? And then you have no one left to continue with this work. So they're also trying to instill some of those leadership values. And we're thinking about a feminist leadership. What does it mean within Africa and from an African feminist perspective? So I do think those two examples would be very good examples from a regional perspective to look at.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lizelle. So one final question now to end potentially on a high. The way depends on the answers. But we've been asking the chat to please reflect for a moment on the fellowship itself. What was the most valuable aspect of the program? Ramu, would you like to start? Because I just asked Zarka and Neri the question before.
Sure. In terms of the most meaningful or useful things about this fellowship, I think number one, it's been connecting with other women peace builders in the space and just learning how peace building works in different contexts, especially where in my context in Botswana, it's not fully a conversation yet. So just seeing how it looks like in the post-conflict setting and also in contexts like Morocco and Egypt, how that looks has been amazing. I think another important area of the fellowship that I really benefited from was being able to make partnerships with other women experts that are in different organizations. Typical example is connecting with Lizelle, which has been amazing. Just being able to tap into her mind in terms of what peace building looks like in the Southern African region and the continental region at large. That was also really, really beneficial for me. Another key benefit was, I think, the autonomy to be able to design at will and innovate what we wanted to research about. It was really like the sky's the limit. So I really felt the freedom to be independently thinking and innovating in my context. And having the safe space to do that with Elena and with Brianna and with Cassie as well. It was really amazing. Those are the key highlights of my experience at the fellowship.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ramu. Zarka?
Yeah, thank you, Alina. For me, the very most of important issue during the fellowship was that it was opportunity to hear and also to learn from other senior women peacemaker from other countries that we were during the fellowship together. And inside of this, it was a good opportunity to hear from the senior from the new generation of peacemaker that we have had three very young and also from the new generation of peacemakers. So it was a good opportunity, and during the life of this fellowship, it was a good opportunity for me to hear from the challenge and problems that women peacemaker right now have in the other countries, especially in those countries that there is conflict and they have the same situation of Afghanistan. So, and this was some kind of motivation for me that Afghanistan is not the only country that women are facing with lots of problems. There is other countries that women are facing with the same problems, but the only different things from Afghanistan is that right now we passed all of those challenges, but right now we have nothing because we lost all of our achievement, and right now we have nothing but same problem with all of the women in the different country regarding to their participation in the peace process and other aspect of the life.
Thank you, Zarka. And Neri?
I would say three things. One is why women peacemaking or involving women in peacemaking is important. I think in the beginning, it's reluctant to fully, engage into this because of exclusivity. Like I felt that just focusing on women peace building is very exclusive and will make us feel into the narrative that women are peaceful by nature and all of this. But the more I did my own research, the more I had dialogue with other women fellows, the more also the research itself, where I really worked with women peace builders. And so what this dialogue, this communication creates in terms of resilience and learning, I begin to notice, I have my own answers of why women peace building and why women should be integrated and why identity matters in peace building. The second learning was very deep and hard, so very transformative. Because as I said, I had a conflict between me and one of the junior peacemakers who was doing the research, collaborating in the research. And it was a typical example of an intergenerational peace building relationships. And I learned a lot from this hard experience. I would say that I discovered so many things about my communication style, about my boundaries, my values, and what I need to change, but also what I need to acquire, what I'm entitled for from other people. How can I have healthy relationships with other junior colleagues? This was very, very transformative. The third one is research. I wasn't aware that it's important as a practitioner to have this research element, and this either I do it myself or even have this as a component in my work. It's crucially important. And since the fellowship, I started to integrate a research component in my programs.
Excellent. Thank you, Neri. So there's one more question that which we didn't answer, which is about how civil society can be strengthened to take up this important topic more effectively. But I should say that the entirety of the report actually deals with this question, both in terms of formalized civil society, so organizations and NGOs, but also informal civil society, movements, activists, and so on. So we'll have to finish the Q&A there. I'd like to thank the panelists and everyone in the chat who's been very active and encouraging, but also supportive of the work that has been done by the international partners as well as the fellows. Back to you, Brianna.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our speakers today. And I hope that everyone will take a time to read the report and read those case studies in particular. I want to leave us with just a few reflections on the recommendations that we've identified in the report. We know that long-term challenges, whether they're security-related, environmental, health-related, or many of the other challenges we're facing, have long-term and cross-generational impacts. And creating intergenerational strategies and partnerships is critical to addressing these impacts. We've heard today a lot of different examples about how women are working across generations to promote long-lasting and sustainable peace. For international organizations and peacebuilding donors, we found that it's important to consider age and generation when designing programs, ensuring that youth and women, and young women in particular, are fully included. It's key that youth-focused programs include women in a meaningful way, and that women-focused programs include youth in a meaningful way. Through this research, we learned that youth-led organizations often have difficulty accessing funding and grant-making mechanisms. So it's important to create flexible processes with support for people who may have limited experience working with international organizations. Across our interviews, across the context where we worked for this program, we heard over and over again about the importance of networks and coalitions. Networks allow women peacebuilders to build relationships and share knowledge and opportunities across generations. They can also help create pathways for sharing power and ensuring that leadership transitions can occur. As Zarka said, peacebuilders of different generations often take different paths, but they share the same dream and the same goal, and networks are critical to achieving those goals. And lastly, we learned how important it is for junior and senior peacebuilders to seek to build mutually respectful partnerships focused on dialogue and the willingness to learn from both sides. For me, it has been a real pleasure to learn with this cohort of fellows and to learn from the wonderful partners that made this work possible. I want to thank all of our speakers here today, and I also want to acknowledge my colleagues, Ashley Boren, Andrew Blum, Neshla Shurgi, and Cassie Barrett, and everyone else who has supported this cohort along the way. Please follow us on social media. You'll find the full report and case studies there, and you can keep up to date with what's new in the Women Peacemakers program. As Lisel said to us, peacebuilding does not have a start date and an end date. So thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to all of you in the audience for whatever you're doing to push forward that long and steady work of peace building. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Bye.